Asbestos is a remarkable mineral.
Asbestos exposure causes cancer.
Some patients may be afraid of taking opioids.
The biggest drug epidemic in American history.
Right, well, the President of the United States is lying!
In films and literature, the apocalypse is shown as a loud, defining climax for humanity, a huge impending threat that we need to fight with all our might or face the inevitable doom. But, in reality, our greatest dangers are often hidden, concealed in our perception. Think about it this way. A man enters a restaurant. He sits alone to enjoy dinner and asks for the chef's special. And there it is, a credit card? He swallows it whole without a second thought. He does this every week until, 50 years later, he dies by plastic poisoning. What a surprise. A clear sign of stupidity of a man seeking pleasure in something meaningless that costed his life in the long run. But as obvious of a blunder this is, we are currently in the same path as him. Every week, we actually consume around 5 grams of plastic, the same weight as a credit card, an inescapable consequence born from the 380 million tons we discard yearly. Decomposition turns them into microplastics, which can be found everywhere: oceans, mountains, food, and recently, even babies. As alarming as this is, hardly no one seems to care about it. We saw how insane it is to see someone eat plastic all the time, but this is exactly what we are doing. So why is that? Simply put, we don't care for what we can't see, or for what we can't feel, especially if it will affect us only in the long run. When talking about apocalypses, a man eating a credit card seems weird, but that might very well represent our downfall 50 years from now. An ending born not from raging wars or AI revolution, but from our indifference to silent threats. This is, unfortunately, our nature, not exclusive to microplastics, a cycle that has repeated itself many times throughout history. These are the so-called Sometimes, what looks like a miracle can just as easily turn into a curse. Before 1930, Wittenoom was a calm little town in Australia with a few hundred people, until one of its residents found the largest deposit for one of the most important materials in the planet, asbestos. Before plastic became humanity's most resilient material, asbestos was considered the magic mineral.
Asbestos is a remarkable mineral. Actually stone, it is made up of tiny but extremely strong and flexible fibers. It was absolutely fire safe, and water couldn't harm it.
Asbestos was widely used in almost all industries of the world. Because of its value, the modest town quickly became Australia's epicenter of asbestos mining, with thousands migrating to the city. Everything was going well in the prospering town, with a strong community and unprecedented economic growth, until
We suggest you consider this material for your home.
30 years after the rise in popularity of the miracle mineral, the health effects began to emerge. No one knew at the time, but asbestos releases microfibers in the air that causes permanent breathing problems and many forms of lung cancer. Millions suffered the consequences of being exposed to the mineral, and hundreds of thousands passed away because of it. Wittenoom, once a land of opportunity, is now a ghost town, starting to be demolished as of this year. But even when it turns into dust, it is estimated that 100,000 people still pass away every year due to asbestos in the air. It seems that if I had a nickel for every time a micro piece of a substance widely used by mankind that unknowingly contaminated millions of people with unforeseen consequences, I would have 1 nickel. But I certainly don't want to have 2.
Often, it will be an opioid medication. Some patients may be afraid of taking opioids because they're perceived as too strong or addictive. But that is far from actual fact.
Sarah had a very promising life ahead of her. She just bought an apartment and was getting ready to get married. But one day, a car crash almost took her life and left her with chronic back pain. Working or even focusing for any length of time became an excruciating task. Out of options and wanting her life back, she was prescribed oxycodone, an opioid medication. The miraculous drug instantly brought relief, and Sarah was ecstatic that she got her life back, but only for a time. Months turned into years, and the medication that saved her now barely eased her pain. She needed more pills, more often, with a silent dependency growing inside her. But now, the times were changing. Restrictions increased, and she could no longer get her daily doses. as her physical and mental pain were becoming unbearable, she needed a way out. She needed a cheaper alternative that no legal drug could provide: heroin. Sadly, this was the defining moment for Sarah. She could barely function, hostage of her vice, once a woman in the turning point of her life, now ruined and scared forever. Sarah's journey from a life full of promise to the depths of addiction is a slow burn, a terror that unfolds hidden in silence. Each pill, each moment of relief is a step deeper into the abyss. In the end, Sarah fought and lost a war that took millions of lives in the 90s due to the opioids overprescription, throwing them in a cycle of dependence and despair. Another miracle solution, just like the asbestos, that acted as the apocalypse for people like Sarah. Even 20 years later, we still suffer the consequences of our blindness.
Opioids are now the biggest drug epidemic in American history.
With 16 million suffering from opioid disorder worldwide, with Sarah serving as an example of a hidden threat born from our difficulty to see the dangers that grow in our minds. Not a typical apocalypse, but definitely seems like it for the ones that are affected. A silent takeover of our lives.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things they simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think.
When we look at what was the main cause for the impact of the asbestos and heroin epidemic, we have one common ground: fake news. Those silent dangers are so threatening because, unfortunately, understanding their nature is a path made harder by ourselves. Even the most straightforward problems turns into complex battles of truths, leading us in irreversible and sometimes fatal ways. In the movie Don't Look Up, a huge meteor is coming down on Earth, an obvious apocalypse, but what follows is not that simple. Social media and news channels starts posting about celebrities' opinions, scientists' scandals, and how this will impact in the future election. The obvious problem, the meteor, becomes a source of entertainment and monetary gain rather than urgency, with fake news becoming the biggest obstacle for humanity's salvation, and with almost no attempts to separate what is true from what is fake. We can just blind ourselves to the apocalypse. Just in 2020, it was estimated that nearly 40% of Americans have accidentally shared fake news with their friends. This was the same year as the pandemic. Misinformation about the contamination, treatments, mortality, and of course, vaccines affected not only public perception, but even the government's decisions. Lies became almost indistinguishable from the truth. But at least luck had it that this outbreak was way less dangerous than previous ones. But someday a new crisis will arrive for humanity. Maybe a meteor, maybe another virus. Then it may be too late for us to destroy our own machine of self-deception. When tragedy finally strikes, we will ask ourselves, how didn't we see that one coming? Silent apocalypses. Born from hidden threats that grow in our industries, in our minds, and in the lies we tell ourselves. Our vulnerability is not from the obvious. As our evolution becomes faster, the urge for innovation overshadows the caution necessary for us to avoid catastrophe. We are just starting to see the consequences of climate change. And now, after decades in development, artificial intelligence is spreading uncontrollably, and no one seems ready for it. And amidst all of that, Microplastics stands silently asking us, silent apocalypses. They don't announce their arrival. They grow silently over decades, unnoticed until escape becomes impossible. We might be surrounded by danger, but blinded to it. This reminded me of a famous anecdote from the 19th century. If a frog is placed in boiling water, it will jump out immediately, sensing the danger. However, if it's placed in cold water that is slowly heated, it doesn't perceive the danger and will be boiled alive. The gradual increase in temperature is not noticed until it's too late to jump out. A real frog, as it turns out, will notice the change and jump out. But you see, this story is not about the frog. This is about us. Well, thank you for sticking until the end. This was my first video, so please leave your feedback in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.